here, 070.11 east longitude, 34.05 north latitude. I put us right about here, this white. This is Pakistan. If we could make it into Pakistan, clearly Osama bin Laden could. Remember, he had that 36-hour phony ceasefire in which to do it. It took us less than 3 hours. Once into Pakistan, all this direction, all he has to do is just melt into the woodwork, first in the city of Parachinar or Peshawar, the big tribal city where he's very popular, not very far. Could even get down here to the railroad. Once he's into Pakistan, he could be anywhere in here. But I firmly believe this is where he went, and I think he's still here. If he's alive, I think he's still in this rugged territory.
And 7 years later, I still believe what we said that day in 2002. But that country, after being ignored by Washington since the years after Osama bin Laden slipped the news back in December of 2001, especially after the fighting really heated up in Iraq 2004, 2005, the war in Afghanistan could not today be any hotter than it ever was, either in debate or on the ground.
The situation is serious, and I choose that word very, very carefully. I also say that neither success or failure for our endeavor there in support of the Afghan people and the government can be taken for granted.
Taking nothing for granted, today U.S. and Afghan soldiers stormed an al-Qaeda compound in the eastern mountains near the Pakistani border. The U.S. military confirming that more than a dozen militants were killed and more captured, even as President Obama weighs the request heard round the world from Commanding General Stanley McChrystal for more troops to reverse a dangerous reversal of fortune in the war-torn South Asian country.
This effort will not remain winnable indefinitely. Public support will not last indefinitely. But the cruel irony is that to succeed, we need patience, discipline, resolve, and time.
On the Sunday talk shows, it was all about Afghanistan.
Our strategy remains the same. We are committed to Afghanistan. We are very clear that the conjunction of al-Qaeda and elements of the Taliban and other extremists pose a direct threat to our two countries and really to the world.
The mission is in serious jeopardy. I think General McChrystal, who is one of our very best, if not the best at this, has said a counterterrorism strategy will not work.
But I do, again, argue for some deliberate speed because our allies in the region are beginning to get the impression that perhaps we are wavering, especially in light of the fact that in March the President announced that we did have a strategy. So are we developing a new strategy, or is it just trying to adjust for some changed circumstances?
I think I'm with General McChrystal. He says that the force structure we have today, 68,000 American troops, plus our NATO partners, plus the Afghan army, are not sufficient to turn around the momentum that the Taliban have gained. We need more combat power. General McChrystal says 40,000 in that neighborhood. I would go with the general.
Lindsey Graham today, I don't always agree with him. He was spot on. I thought he was really, really good this morning. Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican of South Carolina. We've got a great panel to discuss and debate what's going on in Afghanistan, what we should do about it. General Wesley Clark, the former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, joins us tonight in Little Rock. Former Congressman and member of the Armed Services Committee during his time in Washington, J.C. Watts is there again in D.C. Ann's in Florida tonight. The Reverend Al here in New York with me. General Clark, Senator Feinstein is saying that, you know, a counterterrorism strategy won't work. We haven't really announced what our strategy is going to be. Are you troubled that it's taken the President this long to pick a lane?
I think the administration has to get it right. I think you've got to provide more troops. I think you've got to listen very carefully to the commander on the ground. When he says it's serious, it's serious. When he says he needs help, get him help. But I don't think you can succeed without dealing with the situation in Pakistan, Geraldo. That's where Osama bin Laden is, and we should intensify the efforts to get him out.
You know, talking about Pakistan, you know, that stunning assault on Army headquarters, just chilling General Clark in terms of the fact that they for a time held hostages inside Pakistan's Pentagon. For God's sakes, that's a country with nukes.
Right, and it shows that however surprising it is that they're taking some action, they're not taking enough action, and we need to encourage them to do more, and maybe we need to do more with them.
Ann, you said yesterday, and I really want to give you a chance to clear this up because it really had me scratching my head. You think that we're taking our eye off the ball in Iraq, and that we should ignore or, you know, at a minimum, tread water in Afghanistan. Do you still really believe that?
Well, there are a few things that I think people are that people aren't. I mean, just to say, do we need more troops, fewer troops? You have to look at what the war on terrorism is. It is not just Osama bin Laden. It is not just Al Qaeda. It is not against a country. There are a number of terrorist networks, as I mentioned last night. It wasn't Al Qaeda that hit and bombed the World Trade Center in 1993. It wasn't Al Qaeda that bombed some of our embassies and has killed lots of Americans. There's Hezbollah. There are all sorts of terrorist groups. They are spread out in various countries. We were picking the battlefront of where we were going to fight them by focusing on Iraq. It's not that we're taking our eye off the ball. It's that liberals had to cover for the fact that they don't want to fight any wars, but they couldn't say that immediately after 9/11. So they created this big artificial construct of Afghanistan being the good war. That's the war of necessity, as opposed to Iraq, which was allegedly the war of choice. It isn't like that at all. In Iraq and Iran, I might add, you have people who are very Western, who are sympathetic to the United States, who had leaders who were crazy. We did have a successful regime change in Iraq. What are you going to do in Afghanistan? What are you going to do in Pakistan? You want a military presence, but you can't have a regime change. The people are al-Qaeda in those countries.
The problem is that the reason that people didn't want to go to Iraq after 9/11 is that it was clear that 9/11 was caused by al-Qaeda and bin Laden.
In the Vietnam War, Ann, Johnson was criticized, and then later Nixon for not listening to anybody. Here you have Obama holding these unprecedented meetings, extensive meetings. Can you briefly tell me whether or not you think that's a good idea?
Actually, the problem with Johnson was much like the problem with Obama. He was picking strategic targets not out of military necessity, but out of political necessity, and that is what's happening here. And to have these bromides about we need to win and we need to control the governments in Pakistan and Afghanistan is just not paying attention to what those countries are. I don't even know what that means. You have countries where the people are sympathetic with al-Qaeda. After we had regime change in Iraq, that changed the entire region. I promise you, those kids protesting in the street of Iran are praying for the U.S. to invade them.
I think Ann's problem with Johnson and Obama is they were Democrats. I don't know what target she's claiming.
Thank you all. Coming up, her dad was the nation's top mobster after this.